Now we're going to be looking at the brain. This is one of my favorite sections. The brain is really just fascinating. And so learning the different structures helps us in so many ways in understanding what aspects of the brain are being affected due to an injury or what we need to avoid. It also helps us in diagnostics and lots of different things. So, since the brain is so important, we have lots of different structures here to know. We've got different lobes of the brain, how to describe different features, different particular glands, ventricles, and even the 12 cranial nerves, all right? So this is going to be a big portion here. So the brain is broken down into different lobes. We've got temporal, parietal, frontal, occipital here, and then we also have what we call the insula, which is one that's kind of easy to forget. So remember, you've got those 4 lobes plus one more. We have 5 lobes, just like we have 5 senses, all right? And so then also we have here on the bottom, or at the top here is this cerebrum, and then we have the cerebellum down here, and then the brain stem. So the largest portion of the brain is what we call the cerebrum. This is what is highlighted in orange here. It is divided into right and left hemispheres, as you can see right here along this fissure. And this is going to receive and process all of conscious sensation. And it is going to respond to sensory neurons and send signals to cause motor functions to occur. This is a very, very busy portion of our brain, and it is very active. And so we've already said the cerebellum is divided into lobes. And so here we're looking at the frontal lobe, which is, of course, in the front, but it's also near the frontal bone, if you remember from Anatomy 1. So this red portion here is the frontal lobe, and this is looking at an anterior aspect. Both sides there, you have the right and left frontal lobe. And remember, just like any other structures, you're going to look at your patient's right and left, not your right and left. Here we have the parietal lobe. Parietal means wall in Latin, so this basically forms the walls here. And it is hangly near the parietal bone, okay? And so retaining this information is so helpful for us as we go through anatomy. So this is the upper back area here of the skull, and it processes sensory information, mostly things like touch, taste, and sensing things like temperature. And so here you can see that the temporal lobe begins here near the temples. So the temporal lobe is also located or situated near the temporal bone. This is the anterior portion here is going to be where your temples are, and this is going to be involved in processing sensory information for things like retention of visual memory, which is very important for anatomy, language comprehension, learning all these words, and for emotional association. And of course, you have a right and left temporal lobe. All right, so this one is a little harder to see. It's the green portion here. It's the occipital lobe, which is at the back of your head, the occipital, near the occipital bone. This is the posterior portion of the brain, and this is where our visual processing center lies. So we still have the insula, but we'll look at that in just a moment. So we have some different names for features of things, just kind of like we did on bones. We have what we call a sulcus. A sulcus, I think, sinks in. This is a depression or a groove. And so the central sulcus is at the center of the head, kind of like a sagittal cut where we have that crown shaped for the old-fashioned crown that goes this way instead of this way, right? Shaped central sulcus, and you can see this really well highlighted in orange here, and it's this division here. And so lateral means to the side, so the portion of the sulcus, the main sulcus here that is on the side, is what we call the lateral sulcus. It's a little harder to see in this diagram because there is a space there, but you can imagine it goes down here, and it's very easy to see right there. All right, and so here is the insula, and it's kind of like a little hidden lobe, so to speak. This is, when I hear insula, I think island, and when I look at this section here, it looks like two little islands situated deep within the brain, and you can see where this portion is cut out and removed, that portion there is the insula. So this is within the lateral portion of the brain, and you can see it is here as well, and this is attached to the midbrain here on this model that you will look at in a little bit. Alright, so next we have the transverse fissure, which is another opening, but this is a long, narrow opening, kind of like a line or breakage. Okay, so line or breakage. So transverse, it's going to be this way. And so it's easy to see over here, this break. It's very wide, much more so than the other feature, but here it's a little bit harder to see. So you can see the fissure is really deeper and more of a separation than the sulci. And so here we have a longitudinal fissure. So it goes like if you were to make a longitudinal cut. It's this way. Next we have the cerebellum, which basically means little brain, and it really looks like a little brain below the brain, which is really kind of neat looking. So it's right there. You can see it really well here, and this is it attached to the midbrain. And so cerebellum, little brain, and it's located near the brain stem, which is what we see in that little cutout. And this helps to coordinate voluntary movements and motor skills. In the cerebellum, we have this white matter, and we call this white matter arbor vitae. Arbor vitae, which means tree of life. And you can look over here and see it really does look like the branches of a tree. It's really pretty cool. And this is the white matter of the cerebellum, and that brings sensory and motor information into and from the cerebellum. Next, we have the corpus callosum, which is one of my favorite features because here it is easy to identify. It looks like a C laying on its side. Doesn't that look like a C there? This is a C-shaped nerve fiber bundle, and it stretches across the midline of the brain, and it is what connects the two hemispheres. So just below the corpus callosum there, you can see we have what we call the fornix, and this means arch. This is actually a major output here for the hippocampus, and so it's located near the hippocampus. I really like this picture here on the left. It's nice in color, coordinated to help you remember things. You can see the thalamus and the hypothalamus. You can see the fornix there. The cerebellum is colored in green. You can see the fourth ventricle. That can be really hard to see. So this is a pretty nice little sagittal section of an actual sheep brain here with the little colors highlighted to help you recognize the different structures. And so here are some more of the features we're going to be looking at for the brain. Here we're looking at the optic chiasma. I really like the optic chiasma. It's kind of neat. It has this nice little X shape here to it, and then we can break that down. So it's an X shape here right in front of the hypothalamus, and this is crucial to vision. Okay, and this is where we actually have a crossing over of our vision here. So the bottom portions of that X, so to speak, of the optic chiasma are what we call the optic tract. This is part of the visual system, and it is continuous here with the optic nerve. This is where those paths, these electrical signals, are going to be sent through from what we see with our eyes, are sent through here, and they cross over as they go through the brain and help us to get to where we can process it and make sense of what we are seeing. And then here we have the optic nerve, which is actually cranial nerve number 2, and this is what connects the eyes to the brain. When we dissect a sheep brain, some of these smaller nerves are really hard to see, so you will appreciate things like your optic chiasma, the olfactory bulb, and those features that are nice and easy to identify, because these other nerves are very thread-like and small, and they can be very hard to differentiate. Is this a nerve? Is this a vessel? It can be really difficult when you are actually dissecting the sheep brain because it's really only about this big. They're very small. All right, so here we have the olfactory bulb, which is the same portion here where cranial nerve 1 comes through. Olfaction is your sense of smell. And then below that there, so we have the olfactory bulb is the top portion, and then you have the olfactory tract below it. And it's not always that obvious of a difference when you're actually dissecting a sheep brain, but this is a really good sample here. And so the sense of smell receives its neural input here. All right, here we have the thalamus, we have some really small guys here that are very, very important. This is the center for your pain perception, and it relays some sensory information. So it's there at number 14, and it's also right here. Much harder to identify when everything is all the same color. So appreciate your models here where things are numbered and color coordinated, because it really helps us to know what we are looking at. Next, we have the pineal gland, which is also sometimes called the epithalamus, epi meaning above. I think pineal gland peanut because it's tiny, 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 and it looks like a little peanut. And this guy is really important, though, for hormone secretion. So the pineal gland here, and this is oriented the opposite way, so it's that little guy there, really that top loop of my circle. So here at number 26, we have the hypothalamus. So hypo means below. So again, this is a small guy, but it's a very major player in many important functions. It releases hormones and helps maintain homeostasis with things like regulating body temperature. So the hypothalamus is very important.